Hi, friends. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to chat about what the hell is going on with the global fragrance community. As some of you know, some of you might not, one of the biggest open to the public perfume conferences, Esxence, is happening in Milan at the beginning of March. It happens every year. Sometimes they combine it with other beauty related conferences and expos. Sometimes they don't. That said, this is the one that kind of is more open to the public. It's not just about the product manufacturing, logistical chains, branding, and kind of behind the scenes corporate stuff. Here, perfumers actually present their future launches for the next year, which, this year they're showcasing what they're planning to launch in 2024. There are a bunch of your favorite influencers and bloggers. This year I opted not to be there, but hopefully next year I will be there, especially if Histoire de Perfumes just decides to join and just invites me. I check the branding, the brands that participate this year, and some of them were really, really intriguing, a lot of new brands, but some of the well-known ones that you would expect to actually see there were not listed at all, so I don't know what's going on there. But anyway, this is a beginning of a new era, not only for us in a global fragrance community, but also for us on my channel, because we are going to talk about news. I feel like such a streamer in this setup. Not sure if I love it or hate it, but we're going to roll with it for now. Those of you can still participate by watching their social media feeds and by watching some of the keynote presentations that are, at least for the several years in a row, they're posting completely publicly for free. So I have watched a keynote presentation by the master perfumer Khalees Becker, the one who's, I think her star rose with Tommy Hilfiger. And she actually talked about some of her key famous fragrances and their history of the making. And I think probably one of the best known fragrances that she designed their regional of is J'adore Dior. And she was talking how back in the day, in the 90s, it was hilarious that Tommy Hilfiger, that now is almost like this one of those kind of half forgotten brands, was the fashion brand. It was all over the news. It was so hot. It was so fresh. So designing Tommy Girl, which I guess to my memory, I actually had it, is just this super synthetic, girly, nothing to remember. It was such a big deal. There was so much scrutiny. So there was so much attention to the Tommy Girl. And right after that, when she started working on J'adore for Dior, it was quite the opposite. The Dior at the time in the 90s was experiencing quite a bit of a identity crisis. They were quite dated. They haven't really found their new footing yet. John Galliano has not arrived as an artistic director. So they were kind of one of those like vintagey, dated, old lady type of fashion houses. So nobody paid any attention, according to her, when she started developing the mocks for J'adore Dior. And that fragrance alone shaped like a generation of women now. We can hear people in the dating market saying like, oh my God, I just went out on a date with this girl and she smells exactly like my mother. What was it? J'adore Dior. And it's like, when I hear that, I'm like, I'm so old. I am so old. Anyway, so that was a fun lecture. But the one that kind of got me raised my blood pressure a little bit. I love when we speculate collectively on the trends and what's going to happen in the future. And as you know, I made my own prophecy that I summoned using my kind of the intuitive senses and my inner databases of what I know to be true about just general economy of beauty industry and what I've observed in the beauty community. And now I finally have a chance, we have a chance to benchmark, was I full of shit or not? Because people came and presented the data. And here I'm going to transition us to a lecture that is given by, let's see, this is Clayton Ilolahia from Fragrances of the World. Fragrances of the World is one of the oldest data collecting / marketing companies, and that was created by Michael Edwards on the date of my birth in 1983. And he was one of the people, he was like Zrali in the world of wine. He was the guy who came up with empirical but useful language that sellers and marketers of the perfume could use to talk to the end consumers of fragrances, because there was such a huge disconnect in how the inner crowd of the perfume industry, the perfumers, the technicians, the ingredient companies, were talking about the organic ingredients, the organic chemistry of it all, and how people really perceived perfume. And there was such a big kind of disconnect between, oh, it smells so cute, or smells so sexy, and oh, this has a fair amount of hedione and ambroxan, and then we added a little bit of this and this and that. It was just not compatible, and even the old school perfumery descriptors were not really categorized and didn't necessarily play well with each other. So he came up with a now famous perfume wheel, where you could kind of go sector by sector and see how the ingredients play together to make the types of scents that we know of shippers or gourmands or fresh and oceanic. Throughout the years, I think it's pretty old. Like the first rendition of fragrance wheel was in the 80s. So with the huge leaps of progress that organic chemistry in material design has made since then, he tried to adopt it. I find that the fragrance wheel is fairly outdated in the model world, but having some classification is better than none. So that's something that's still, I think it's a useful entrance. And then you kind of can deviate from the basic staples and talk about rather unusual fusions that don't necessarily fall into the same kind of metamorphosis of notes, but it still works to at least shape the discussion to begin with. And then later you can talk, well, actually everything is much more complex than that, and there are all these regional fragrance families that don't quite fit into the definition of, let's say, woody amber. That said, still useful. And what I wanted to discuss here is when we get to, actually, let me get back to the main view just for a moment, is the sheer insanity of what's happening with production and the business side of things. I told you that in the fragrance forecast. If you haven't watched the video, please do. Keep me honest. If I'm gonna overcredit myself today, just let me know, and I don't care. I'll continue to do so because I am victorious. I feel so validated in the worst of my predictions. In the last year, according to this data collection agency, and the numbers can differ between the collection agencies. However, the Fragrances of the World report that in 2023, there were 3,314 fragrance launches. We're not talking about sales. We're not talking about the market growth on the demand side. We're talking purely about production, about what the fragrance industry is doing. 3,000, roughly 300. Just to give you a benchmark, in 2003, it was 114. that would be classified as niche. And again, out of these 3,000, 1,563, well, nearly 1,600 are classified as niche just in 2023 alone. Just to put this in perspective, as a fragrance evaluator and, a blogger, if I was to faithfully do installments of let's discuss new fragrances and to actually cover the industry in the last year, which contains 52 weeks, on average, me and other fragrance reviewers, including you, we would have to consume and process the information about roughly 60 fragrances a week on average. That is on average. Meaning that maybe one week we get lucky and it's only 20 fragrances we need to try, evaluate and discuss. But on some weeks, when the releases are pretty heavy, we might have 200 in a week. That whole thing renders trying to keep up with the Joneses, just trying to know what's new and know what's hot, nearly useless. The whole concept of new kind of loses its value when it's a barrage. It's like getting a fire, like a garden hose, sticking it into your mouth and like cranking up the water. It's insane. Like, we're drowning in new releases. And what's interesting, that niche fragrances, and actually he talks about it quite a bit in this lecture. You're welcome to watch it on Esxence YouTube channel. Niche is not that niche because it's over, It's over half of all releases in a year. Niche, by definition, is supposed to be something rather small, a small part of the larger union. It's not the same anymore. And I completely, wholeheartedly agree. I'm struggling in how to describe brands and how to understand their place in the market now, because there is, like, I have my own wheel of fragrance businesses where, you probably have already heard me talking about Instagram niche. These are pretty much white labeling of prepackaged scents that, like, a startup emerges out of nowhere. You don't know who owns it. You don't know who's behind it. There's no master perfumer who drives the creative vision. They just pretty much come up with pretty packaging. They get the investor money to spend on advertising, and they pretty much order large chemical factories such as Givaudan, Simrise, and yada yada yada, to make the collections for them, and they pretty much just play a little bit of picking and choosing, and then they wrap it up and they sell it with a brand name. And you don't know where they came from, we don't know where they're coming to. It's pretty much just these bubbly aberrations. It's like a bouquet that just emerges out of nowhere, looks pretty for a second, then disappears into nowhere just the same. And beauty industry is full of agents like that. We just haven't seen it proliferate into the fragrance industry just as much. And it surely is driving the whole industry into like a commodity type of market, which it already did happen via the celebrity fragrances. I think back in the 90s, there was a bit of a crush there in the trust and the faith and in the art of fragrance making. But we're well into the next bubble and like bigger than ever. And now to my favorite part of that lecture. Let's look at the top notes of the last year, and we know that in fragrance industry things kind of bleed through 2 or 3 years, and see how many have I predicted correctly. All right, and I'm not part of this company. I have no access to their data whatsoever. So here we are. We have ginger, we have coconut, we have cognac, incense, soft leather, and tobacco. Ginger, I didn't name explicitly, but I talked about refreshing teas. So bergamot, mint, anything that gives you this slightly refreshing yet soothing feeling. And I think actually ginger falls into it. Thank you so much. I'll add it to the list. So I'll call it like a partial victory. I guessed the overall family, kind of the overall feeling correctly, but I forgot about this rather useful ingredient. Um, Coconut. I do see it being popular, like creamy sandalwood, creamy musks, coconut, vanilla, but I find them always to be popular. I don't really see any kind of craziness going on with everybody running around dying to smell like coconuts. It's more just like it's a consistently love, easy to wear gourmand note. So, I mean, I believe them. There are a lot of coconutty fragrances, but I'm not sure. Like, have you noticed that coconut is really have become a trend in terms of like just aching for coconutty scent in you or in the people that you know? Not sure if I noticed that. But anyway, I mean, then they have the data. Cognac, boozy fragrances, yes. But I would say probably I see it more just a general proliferation of woodiness, thankfully also into the male marketed perfumery, because at this point, like how many mineral oceanics fougères can be sustained? So woody is not that bad. And I think, yeah, like right now woody fragrances tend to be either very not musky, but ambraxani, or or woody, kind of almost spicy a little bit, and that's what I would say alcoholic notes really add to any fragrance. Cool. I would consider that a very comfortable popular base. Would I consider this a single trend? Not sure, but I would say, yeah, it's one of the trendy bases for perfumes. Incense. Well, here, you gotta give it to me here. I mean, I nailed it. Nailed it. Absolutely, yes. Incense is the trend of the past year. It's the trend of this year. And I think incense is gonna stay with us for a couple of years for sure. Can't wait to see an unusual pairings and less than churchy interpretations of incense. For example, I am kind of curious if Eastern, or let's say Japanese interpretation of incense, because they kind of make their incense concoctions, their mixtures slightly differently that is done in the West. And that has a potential to be a little bit more fresher, a little bit more toned down. That could be interesting, but I'm not an expert in Japanese incense. So, anyway, anything that's unusual or really well made incense, I think truly deserves the flag. And I would love to smell it more often just as a pedestrian, outside of couloirs of perfume boutiques and, perfume lover meetups. I would love to just like walk by on the street and just like, wow, that smelled like incense and peaches. That was cool. All right, the next one, soft leather. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it's not random. They don't give you PhD for nothing. Not that it has any relationship with anything, but I had to like plug it in somewhere. Spent 5 years on that thing. And here I went to a really dark place mentally. Anyway, soft leather. Yes, 100% yes. Clayton mentioned that he sees more of a green and kind of dry, spicy, kind of fresh, spicy leather. Agreed, but I also feel like it's been done to death. We have some really old classics. I mean, they're not so old, but at this point you can say they're old. Like there's Eau de Memo, there's a whole like leathery collection which has a lot of oceanic and fresher and greener leathers as well. We have Rose Coeur by Frederic Malle. We have quite a few green leathers already on the market. And they're really good. And like Rose Coeur by Frederic Malle, gosh, that lasts forever. Talking of beast mode, that will follow you to your grave. I am when I think soft leather, I'm thinking rather subtle variations of the leather, and the leather does not dominate, it's not smoky, it's not resinous, it's not in any way austere, but rather maybe like a subtle leather with subtle minerality, or subtle leather with subtle unusual floral, or banana leather. You know what I mean? Like it's just a slightly more subdued playfulness around a leathery accord. So, called it, feel very validated in that prophecy, can't wait to see more. And tobacco, which brings my recent review of the library collection by Amouage into forefront. It's which has the, I dare say, the best, the most believable and cool tobacco scent that I've sampled on the market. Because most of the time, tobacco scents smell more like hookah bars, and they don't smell like tobacco leaves. They don't smell like real tobacco. There are also cigarette smells, which to me is a very different smell, like jasmine cigarettes. Just bought myself a full-size bottle. Love it. Very unusual, not for everyone, but it brings teenage memories in me. But when we're talking believable tobacco scent, Royal Tobacco by Amouage, dude, that's the benchmark for every other scent to play by. So excited to hear that trend. I didn't guess it, and it's not exactly my cup of tea, but I can see that. I can see that happening. One thing that I think they truly missed, I mean, ginger is a hint, I feel, is that these greener, softer, fresher, minty, bergamot tea, soothing fragrances. And actually, one of you guys suggested creamy florals. Love it. It's a slightly different game. So here, instead of having this soft, soothing, minty freshness of the tea, we're adding a bit of potentially milky musks or santal, molecular santal, something to the mix, maybe vanilla or maybe even the coconut to the green notes, that kind of makes it both green and yet well-rounded and souffle cuddly like. So I feel like something of this kind is needed right now in our cultural and olfactory environment. They didn't call it out though, so we'll see if the next year will validate those predictions as well. I just gotta say though, it is fascinating to see how it's almost like collective knowing that emerges when somebody says it out loud, and everybody's like, yes, exactly. Another thing that he mentioned, let's maybe transition back. I'm not showing you anything here anymore. That tuberose is kind of super trendy note. I find that tuberose was always a popular trendy note. I'm not really noticing any. I don't know. You tell me if you disagree. I think tuberose is just popular. I'm not seeing it becoming any more popular than usual. Another interesting trend mentioned as sort of the overall feel, and not just a note, but overall feel, is starburst fruits, which brings me back to early 2000s in Eastern Europe, where kind of sweet sour perfumes were all the rage. Actually, J'adore Dior, even though it's not fruity and not necessarily doesn't have necessarily these sour berries, but like this sour sweet profile, it's almost, I feel like early 2000s are coming back to bite us. So think berries plus rather sophisticated boozy or woody dry down. So it starts very immature and very bright sour sweet, but the dry down is long and fairly comforting. And I think on the men's side of the marketing, he mentioned icy woods, though I see it everywhere now. It's, as far as I understand, this cold juniper-ish, very refreshing start with, again, a long and reliable woody dry down. The general bismuth fragrances are here to stay, and I think long COVID is only making them even more of a trend. I think my view is people are truly I think two main factors there that I would assign to like why is everybody obsessed about longevity in the beast mode. Not everybody, but majority of people. I would say first premiumization. Gosh, I can't speak today. The continual skyrocketing increase in fragrance prices that is not justified by anything, rather than greed. So that kind of brings the question of value to the forefront. Why would you pay $300, $400, $500 and above for a bottle of, of this juice unless it has some truly unique properties? I mean, this is why people continuously talk about Baccarat Rouge killing everything life in sight as a feature rather than, a problem, because people are paying such crazy money for that fragrance. So I think when we're talking about these ultra high-end niche or premium lines, boutique perfume lines by designer brands, like boutique line by Chanel, Dior, at this point everybody has been on that field and tried to play. Hermes, Chloe has its own line, Burberry has its own line. In order to compete with that well-established brand identity and value, the niche brands just come up with the more and more exultant storylines about magical ingredients, whimsical storytelling. They outdo themselves on the packaging and then just stick a ridiculous price tag where juice really doesn't play that much of a factor. So I think the beast mode discussion is kind of driven partially by the just exultant price tags, because there's got to be some value there, right? Like we got to at least, even if it's not there, people have to rationalize it somehow. And second, I would say COVID, actually. A lot of people, even including me, I had COVID twice, and I realized that I was hypersensitive to a number of aromatic molecules before, because now I can tolerate them. And I became more tolerant towards stronger and more kind of screaming fragrances than I was ever before. So I think it definitely plays a role. People are not really smelling as well as they used to. And I think that's why. Is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. I guess decreased sensitivity is somewhat concerning, but it also is the question of to what degree. Is it everyone that kind of like, is our collective sensitivity to scents decreased somewhat, or is it for some people dramatically and for the majority not so much? That kind of study I haven't seen data of this kind, so it's hard to tell. Another mysterious trend for me that I've heard for now probably 5 or 6 years, and I just find close to no evidence on the ground for it, is that the consumer is so concerned about sustainability and the organic and eco-friendly nature of our supply chain. I haven't once heard anybody say anything about that out of people who actually use fragrances. If anything, you often hear the opposite, lamenting that the constant reformulations, the constant cheapening of the formula, everything becomes synthetic. You don't recognize the old classics anymore. More of that in the fragrance community. And where I hear the usual kind of lamenting that everything needs to be organic, it's mostly the aromatherapy community, which is, I wouldn't even put those people actually in the fragrance community, because it's almost like, how far do you need to stretch astronomy so we can include astrology into it? Like, astronomy is actually science. Astrology is pseudoscience that uses scientific terminology. I find that aromatherapy crowd is kind of the same. They constantly talk about, oh, what, no, my mix of essential oils doesn't contain any chemicals. You guys are safe to use this. And it's just, I start bleeding out of my ears. And it's, it's everywhere. But those people are not buying perfumes. They're not going to Sephora, and they're not going to Esxence. They're not really part of the fragrance community. Like in a way, they're part of the overall fragrance industry because they're buying essential oils and mixing them in their Florida sunrooms and then bringing them to drum circles and other holistic spiritual healing events. And what they mix has a smell, right? Technically speaking, yeah, they're part of the fragrance industry because at least they're buying some ingredients, but they are not part of the fragrance community. They don't use fragrances. So yeah, they are that community is concerned about they're also not concerned about sustainability. They are very afraid of being somehow irreversibly toxically poisoned by smelling something. In a way, it's a very whimsical germophobia. It's not the same that all of these never-ending lectures that I find at every single conference about perfumes talk about, like, oh, the consumer wants us to be eco-friendly and sustainable. The consumer does not care. Like, I am yet to hear this sentiment from anyone anywhere on the ground. So at this point, my conspiracy theory, where is my foil hat, has got to come on, because I'm starting to think, okay, who in the professional fragrance industry benefits from pushing this narrative? Because nobody's asking, like nobody. And I keep hearing this virtue signaling lectures about, let's show our consumer just how pristine and bleached our supply chain is. I mean, great. If we can't stop like extinguishing animals and certain types of flora in order to get a good mossy shipper, great, I'm all for it. However, don't say that the consumer is concerned. That's not consumer who is concerned. It's your accounting department who wants every formula to cost 2 cents. I think. And maybe like a dozen of eco-friendly activists who are trying to save those poor deer musks or whales. Anyway, like, it's just a fake trend. Like, here you have it. I said it. It's a fake trend. Consumers don't care. Nobody ever talks about it beyond just feel-good marketing. But like, I don't know a single person who once even Googled the issue. It's like, yeah, like, you know, like you can hear it in Sephora. And even Sephora, even they push this narrative so hard in skincare and the makeup. Again, the vegan community is sometimes confused about things that you eat and things, you know, like things don't have to be of animal nature in order to be bad for you or toxic. There are like plenty of toxic compounds, molecules that are not of animal origin, and not animal origin ingredients come through the animal cruelty or not sustainable either. It's like argument about the bees and the wax that they produce. It's or animal origin product. Like, how many bees are suffering from being catered to and, you know, still surviving largely due to the efforts of the people who nourish and create those bees communities. I'm like blanking on the word. How do you call it? The hives. So it's at some point I feel like we're going too far being concerned about things that are not really a problem. So I can see this becoming sort of almost like a mirror effect in the perfume industry as a echo from a beauty industry in general, but even in beauty industry, beyond the uneducated kind of dogmatic vegans, nobody cares. On the consumer side, and on the perfume side, even less so. If anything, the opposite. So, and again, so many lectures about sustainability and the eco-friendly. I'm just like, who's sponsoring this? Like, nobody cares. In the good way, in a bad way, I'm not making moral judgments here, but the consumers are not asking you for this. Who is? And the last trend, in case you want to skip Esxence and perfume beauty industry events altogether, the next trend has been going on for a while now, which I see this just, they can't stop. It's just nobody can leave China alone. It's like, no. It's this very adversarial relationship the perfume industry has with Asian markets. It's like they feel that emerging markets owe them. You know what I mean? They owe them money. It's like, how dare you? How dare you to have your own perfume brands in China while we have ages of history here that we can condescendingly and with this imperial snark ship down into your barbarian culture that knows nothing about olfactory design. And sure enough, China bounced rather quickly, and now I think one of the lecturers said either third, like depending what proportion of what you measure, third to a half of, I think third of the brands that sell are Chinese, and I think half of sales, or slightly less than half of sales, are sales of Chinese affiliated or Chinese perfume products. I mean, you kind of mix a little bit of skincare there, but more or less, like flavored, strongly flavored, fragrant products. And it seems that there's like these self-righteous, angry executive anxiety in the air about how dare you produce your own fragrances and not care to get our approval if they're any good? How dare you not buy the something unpronounceable French or Italian or whatever name that we slapped with some kind of Chinese mythology or a cultural term with, it's sent your way. So it's really it's amusing to watch the agony. If I find the link, there was one of the lectures about Chinese friends. There are many. Just so you know, it's a thing. It's a bloodbath happening behind the scenes in all of the strategic growth discussions. Like, how do we win China? I mean, I get it and I don't, because it comes in a sharp contrast to how the whole of, I mean, let's face it, it's kind of occupied by Russia. The whole of Eurasia is treated. They call it in these kind of like demure tone Eastern Europe. I mean, it's much bigger than Eastern Europe, let's face it. That whole block of countries is just never there in discussion, even though it's very robust in consuming and appreciating fragrances. And even forget about that, Latin America, like Latinos love perfume. What are you talking about? Never to be discussed anywhere. I wonder if it's a derivative of the inflation and the difficult economic situation of Latin American countries, but not everybody is dirt poor in Latin America, and there are a lot of Spanish speaking people across the world that kind of they portray and they bring their culture with them wherever they go. And yet, zip, nothing. Like, oh, we'll just ship a few gourmands their way, they'll be fine. But China, how can we understand? It always starts like this. How can we understand the Chinese consumer, but don't speak for longer than 5 minutes, and please bring us a lion's share of your sales. Thank you very much. Bye. That's not how you understand your consumer, is it? It's just the imperialism, the snobism of the perfume industry is just continues to amaze me. And in that sense, I think, you know what? It's about time. It's about time that maybe China becomes the innovator in the perfume industry. Because if nobody else wants to fill the market, well, somebody else will. And they will probably start from rather naive formulations. There will be something like Joe Malone and, just other body mists that something, floral. But they'll keep working on it. They'll come up with a rather sophisticated and very culturally unique olfactory combinations. Not to mention that there's so much material science innovation happening in China that I don't see why they couldn't, if they have money to spend, just hire a few expats, and in 10 years' time, they'll have an army of experts who are raised by those few talented expats who wanted to be free, who wanted freedom to create outside of the corporate fragrance industry that's mostly dominated by American, French, Italian, I would say maybe like a little bit of British sprinkled with Middle Eastern fragrance influences. Like, there will be people who will go to those markets and make an empire there. I surely hope they do. And I surely hope Latin America finally gets some recognition for how much they contribute to the fragrance culture. Okay, maybe they don't contribute to the GDP of the world or the GDP of the fragrance industry as much, but they have, like, I think I saw the sales numbers, they're growing the fastest. Okay, we can argue about, okay, you might be growing 50%, but your base level is so low, right, that your growth is kind of like you're going from 1 to 10, while maybe the rest of the developed world is going from thousands to 10,000. Or 10,000 to 12,000, still much higher volume and therefore much higher influence on the trends. Fine, but come on, it's just, I'm sorry I'm rambling, but I think it needs to be discussed, and I don't hear anybody saying anything anywhere. It's deafening. And you go to any panel discussion and everybody's just like hoity-toity. That's, I think, the problem is with the fragrance community and conferences like that. Nobody speaks their mind because they're either under NDA with corporate, or they are too small to be part of any know-how or any kind of real influence structure. I find that fragrance bloggers are doing all of the heavy lifting of raising awareness, of educating the rest of the world about fragrances and how to smell and what's collectible and what's not, what's niche, what's not, how to search for perfumes, how to identify your own sensitivities, what works for you, what doesn't. It's all bloggers, and the professional fragrance industry shits on them to no end. But every time they get on social media, it's like sad to watch. Even if it's professionally produced video material, it's just so watered down elevator commercials that it's just like, you can't be serious. Really? Come on, guys. So where is the conversation actually happening? It's happening in the comments, on social media, under the perfume reviewers' posts. But I will push it even further. I think we as perfume reviewers, as bloggers, as commenters, as part of the online community, need to push these conversations further beyond, what's the sexiest perfume of the year will always be a pressing question. I'm not gonna die on that hill, all right? I accept the challenge that we'll be talking about the sexiest female male perfume forever. Fine. But they can't be the only thing we talk about, right? So, why isn't anybody talking about these things? That's what I would love to discuss. What about you? I honestly wonder if I'm screaming to the void here. Please, if you're still here, if you're with me, leave a comment, say something. I can't be the only one. Come on. Let's get the ball rolling. That's if it's of any interest, I'll make these like what's up podcasts a more regular thing. And maybe we will even do them live. Why not, right? I think it's a great idea. And the person who comes up with the catchiest name for this series, if there is enough interest, gets a bottle of perfume from me. All right. So leave tentative, catchy hashtags and names below. Let's make this happen. Some of the topics were like I was thrilled about, but some of the discussion lines, it's just bewildering to me. Like, what are we talking about? How is that a thing that we talk about constantly? Like, oh, we're eco-friendly, vegan perfume industry, versus like, how do we squeeze as much money out of those fucking Chinese? And then everybody else does not exist. Like, what? Anyway, I'll be waiting for your comments. I hope you enjoy this ranty, the state of nation, Perfume Nation podcast. I want to hear your hot takes on what the hell is going on. All right? I'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll leave you a bunch of really cool links below. All right? Check them out.